Hi everyone! If you don't know me, I'm Elad. I'm a CSS HTML architect. CSS HTML architect is a kind of a front-end developer that does mainly CSS and HTML, and I love this very much. Besides this, I'm writing a lot of articles on CSS that you can find in this link on medium.com, and I'm community leader of a big community in Israel that called CSS Master Israel and has more than 6,000 members. Besides this, I love to talk about CSS in every meetup and every conference in Israel and in all around the world. And we are here in this online webinar, everything because the coronavirus pandemic. The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted our life in so many ways. Even for me, that I needed to talk in a 2 big conference in Europe, of course, all the conferences in all the world has been cancelled. And in this situation in life, you maybe can be sad. But from my perspective in life, we don't have time to be sad. Because life is very, very short and we always need to think about how to create a good situation from a bad one. And this is exactly what I've done when the coronavirus pandemic has started. First, now even we are working remotely from home, we have a lot more time to spend at home because usually we are going to work in the traffic jam and in the evening traffic jam and in the weekend we just want to rest. But now we have a lot more time to spend at home. And the first thing that I've done when I now have more time at home, first I was rearranging my apartment. I changed everything in my living room. I opened my sofa to a bed that sometimes I can sleep in my living room. And the aquarium that didn't work for 5 years, I put some water and some fishes and everything to create a good environment to stay at home. Because now we all the time to be at home and we need to enjoy to stay at home. And then came the first weekend of the coronavirus pandemic. In this weekend, we cannot go out anywhere. And I thought to myself, what I will do with my new free time that I have now in this weekend? What I will do? And I remembered that 7 years ago, I created a pure CSS game that's called Kill the Birds. And a lot of web developers all around the world loved it very much. And at first, I thought to myself that in the last 7 years, I learned so many new tricks in CSS that now I can create a lot better one. By that, I needed an idea of what it will be about this game. And it was really an easy idea because we are now living in the coronavirus pandemic. Why not to create a coronavirus game? And this is exactly what I've done. I created the coronavirus invaders game. And what is amazing here that everything is of course built only while using CSS and HTML. Yes, for the CSS I'm using the SAS preprocessor that we have in CSS, for CSS, and even for the HTML I'm using an HTML preprocessor that we will talk about it later. But all the logic of this game is done only using CSS and HTML. It's meaning that there isn't any single line of JavaScript in all this project. For example, if I will click the My button, it will open a pop-up. This logic is done only using HTML and CSS. And if I will click the Save the World button, the main navigation will hide and the game itself will open. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click off some viruses, they will be disappear. And as you can see, the score is going up too. Even all that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And what about the countdown? Not really, really? This is only done while using CSS. But before we starting to create any project, we have to think about inspiration because we are starting in a blank page and we need some ideas for the beginning, for the start of this project. And I don't know why I remember that I saw a CodePen half here before that those creature that was painted on the canvas HTML remind me a little bit coronavirus creature. And this was my starting point to create my own coronavirus creature. And I needed a name to the game and how the main navigation will look like. And I took some ideas from the Chicken Invaders game. I don't know why I remember this game, maybe because I don't play so much game in the last years. But I used the invaders from the Chicken Invaders game. My name is the Coronavirus Invaders. And I took some ideas of how to design the main navigation from the same game. And when you're thinking about inspiration, it's not to create everything from nothing. Inspiration is to take other old ideas that you saw in the past and create from them something else, something new. And in this way, I first started to create in my project the coronavirus creatures. And it's nice to see that was my inspiration, and in the end I created something very different, something very else, and I loved it because this is more mine. And I first wanted to start to create the HTML of every one of the coronavirus creature. But for me, HTML is not just throwing an HTML elements to the HTML document like this without thinking. For me, the HTML need to be very precise, very readable. I'm looking on the HTML like an object-oriented thinking, like object, but of HTML. For example, the coronavirus, I started to create the HTML of it with a label with the class coronavirus name and an input with a type of radio. You may ask why I'm using here a label HTML element and why I have here an input with a type of radio. This is part of the logic of the game that we will talk about it a little bit later. But all the visual part of the coronavirus creature, this one, are starting in the body of the coronavirus creature. And all of them, you can see all those 12 hairs are inside the body. And of course the both of the eyes. But from the beginning, when I started to create all those HTML for the game, I saw that I have a lot of repetition. For example, I have 12 HTML errors that go in one by one, and you don't want to copy paste it. And in the real game, I have 100 coronavirus, and you don't want to copy paste them one by one. How can we do it in a different way? It's really my first time in my own life that I'm a web developer that I'm using it. I'm using here an HTML preprocessor that it's called PUG. The PUG HTML preprocessor gives you the possibility to create all this repetition without repeating in the code. Besides, for the CSS, I'm using the SAS preprocessor that I'm using in the last 9 years for every one of my projects. And in this way, instead of writing all those 12 hairs of the coronavirus creature one by one, I can use variables, while loops, and this is exactly what I'm doing here. In this way, I'm creating dynamically all those 12 hairs with the while loop that go in between the value number 1 until 12. And in every rotation, it's creating me all those 12 HTML span elements. And as you can see, the written of the PUG HTML preprocessor is very different from regular HTML. And you need to get used to it. And it's a little bit hard in the beginning. And beside of it, you cannot write half PUG and half HTML. If you are working with PUG, you have to write everything with PUG. And I created all this project in 2 days in the weekend. And if I learned PUG, meanwhile I was creating all this project in 2 days in the weekend, everybody can learn PUG. It's not so hard. And in this way, I updated all my HTML to the PUG written. And this is the example how this HTML is look like in the way of writing of the PUG HTML preprocessor. But now I wanted to start to create all the visual part of this coronavirus creature. I started with the body of the coronavirus. First, I gave it position relative. Why position relative? Because all the other parts of the coronavirus creature need to be according to the body. The eye and the ears, they need to be according to the body of the coronavirus creature. Then I gave the body width of 100 pixel, height of 100 pixel, background color black, and border radius of 50%. In this way, it's getting the circle shape. To create the whole of the eyes without creating two selector to select I1 and I2 together, I'm using here the attribute selector with the start character. This select me both of the eyes together, I1 and I2. Both of the eyes get a width of 20 pixel, height of 26 pixel, background color white, and again border radius of 50%. Because the width and the height is a little bit different, it's getting the egg shape that it's nice way to get for the all of the eyes. And to locate all of the eyes, I'm using position absolute, top 25%. For the first eye, I1, I'm locate it from the left 25%, and to get it little bit to the inside, I'm using here the transform property with the rotate Z value with 15 degrees, this way. The second eye from the right, 25%, and rotate Z minus 15 degrees. This way, the holes of the eyes are getting inside. To create the inner part of the eyes without adding another HTML element, I'm using here the before pseudo element. And in the same way, I give to the inner part a width 8 pixel, height 8 pixel, background color black, and border radius of 50%. As you can see, circles, circles, and circles until now. To create all those 12 hairs without creating different classes, again, I'm using the same idea. I'm using here the attribute selector with the star character. This way, this selector selects me all the classes between hair 1 until hair 12. And to create every one of those hair, I'm using two boxes. And I create them with the before and after pseudo element. The root of the hair is one box. Yes, this is the root of the hair. The crown of the hair is another box that I'm putting up above. And as you can see, the crown of the hair is have the circle shape. How I'm doing it? Again, border radius of 50%. But now I wanted to locate all those 12 hairs all around the coronavirus creature. How I'm doing it? First, I've located all those 12 hairs in the same exactly position. In the middle, in the center of the coronavirus. Exactly here. Position absolute, and located all of them here in the middle of the coronavirus creature. And now, one by one, I'm using and give every one of them a different transform property value. The first hair getting the transform property with a rotated z that doesn't do anything, and a translate y value of minus 65 pixels. In this way, the first hair is going from here to here. But the second hair need to go top and a little bit to the right, from here to here. How I'm doing it? The hair 2 getting the transform property, but now with a rotated z value of 30 degree, and only then the translate value with minus 65 pixel. And if you don't know, the order of the value in the transform property are very important because they are affecting each other. And because the rotated z with the 30 degree value is coming before the translate y value, it's creating the translate value not to going exactly top, then it's going now top and a little bit to the right. In this way, the R2 with the rotated z of 30 degrees and translate y of minus 65 pixels is going from here to here. And in this way, I'm locating all those 12 hair of the coronavirus creature. And as you can see, the only difference is the rotated z values that is coming before the translate value. In this way, I located all those 12 hair of the coronavirus creatures. But as you can see here, we have a lot of repetition in our code, and we as a web developers don't like and don't love repetition. How can we solve it in another way? If we are using in the Sass preprocessor, we can create the for loop that we have in Sass. How I'm doing it? First, I'm declaring a Sass variable with a name of start position and I give it a value of 0 degrees. Then I'm creating the for loop with another Sass variable of with the name of I. This Sass variable with the name of I is going between 1 to 12. And in this way, I'm creating dynamically all the classes between R1 until R12. In every rotation of this loop, the start position is getting bigger with plus 30 degrees on this value. And this way, I'm just putting the start position inside the rotated value, and this for loop creating me this CSS. And it's a very nice way to create it without to do all those repetition. But now I wanted to create that the virus will feel a lot more alive, and I wanted to add some animations. And first I created all the animation for all these hairs. But because every one of the hairs have a different transform value, it's meaning that I need to create 12 different animation. But you don't want to copy paste and create 12 different animation one by one. I'm just creating all those 12 animation in the same for loop. And in this way I don't need to copy paste all those animation. But still this animation is working the same. All the hair are getting outside and inside in the same timeline. To solve it, of course, I'm using the animation delay value. But if you're using animation delay value with positive value for every one of those hairs, let's say for the first hair I have animation value of 60 milliseconds, the second one 120 milliseconds, the third one 180 milliseconds. It's meaning that in the first load of the page the hair will stack, and only after those milliseconds they will start to move. How can we do it in a different way that it won't stack in the beginning of the loading of the page? Instead of using animation delay with positive values, you can use it with negative values. And this is exactly what I'm doing here. The first hair getting a value animation delay of minus 60 milliseconds, the second one minus 120 milliseconds, the third one minus 180 milliseconds, and so on and so on. And in this way, the animation is acting like it's already started in the past, even before the page was loaded. And this is a nice and cool trick to create the animation that will move in different timeline without stacking in the first millisecond of the page. But I wanted that this creature will feel a lot more alive, and I added two more animation for it, for the eyes, one for the inner part of the eyes, and I wanted to create the effect that the eyes are getting closed. How can we do it? I used the after pseudo element that we have in both of the eyes to create another box inside the eyes. This box is with width of 100%, height of 0 pixel, background color black, and in every 5 seconds, in the last half second, it's getting with animation and height of 100%. And in this way, the eyes are getting close. Nice and cool trick. But enough talking about how I created those CSS coronavirus creature. Let's talk about how I created all the logic of the game. But let's first understand what are the frames that I have inside this game. How I'm separating all those frames that we have in this game. Let's look again on the game itself, and let's count all the frames that I have in this game. The first frame that you see here is the main navigation frame. This is our first frame. The second one, if I will click the autoplay pop-up, we have a pop-up. This is another frame, and yes, frame can be on other frame, on the top. The third frame is the same idea. If I'm clicking the OMI, it's open another pop-up. This is our third frame that we have in the game. The last frame is when I'm clicking the Save the World button, the main navigation will disappear, and then we will see the game itself. This is our last 4 frame that we have in this game, yes? Total of 4 frames that we have in this game. How I'm writing all of them in HTML? I'm just creating separate section HTML element that every one of them represent one of the frame. As you can see here, according to the name, the first frame is the game menu frame. The second one is the game frame itself, the third one is the OMI pop-up, and the last one is the autoplay pop-up. And in this way, every one of them is separated a frame in our game, yes? But in the beginning, I just want to see the game menu frame, and I don't want to see all the other frames. How can I hide all the other frames? In a very easy way that I think everyone knows. I just give all the other frame display none, and in this way I don't sing all the other frame in the first load of the game. But now I need to create some flag that will tell me when those other frames are opened or closed, because this frame we don't see them, and we need a way to tell the browser if they are open or they're closed. How can I create the flags without using any JavaScript? I'm adding in the beginning of the HTML document, I'm adding an input with a type of checkbox. And as you can see here, every one of them have a specific ID according for its operation that is doing. For example, the first one is with ID of toggle game. If it's unchecked, it's meaning that we see the game menu frame and don't see the game frame. If the toggle game is with status of checked, we will see the game frame and don't want to see the game menu frame. The second two inputs are even more easy to understand because they're doing only one operation. The autoplay pop-up, if it's unchecked, I don't want to see the autoplay pop-up, and if it's checked, of course I want to see the autoplay pop-up. For the third input of checkbox with the idea of OMI pop-up, if it's unchecked, I don't want to see the pop-up, and if it's checked, I want to see the OMI pop-up. But now we need a way to trigger those flags that we can change their status from checked to unchecked. And how can we change those inputs without clicking exactly on those inputs? How can we trigger checkboxes without clicking on the checkboxes? And it's really one of the first magic that we will see in this game. Because the button of the main navigation that you saw are not button HTML element. Instead, I'm using here label HTML element. This button only look like button, but they are label HTML element. And label HTML element can trigger inputs. How they can trigger? They can be connected with the 4 attribute for a specific input. For example, this button of the Save the World button is connected with the 4 attribute to the ID of the input of this checkbox with the ID of toggle game. And it's meaning when I'm clicking this button, this input checkbox is getting triggered and change its status from unchecked to checked. If you will click it again, it will be again unchecked. You click it again, checked, and so on, as many times that you will clicking on it. The same way for the autoplay and the Oh My button. If you're clicking one of them, it will be checked and unchecked, these both input with the type of checkboxes. Okay, nice trick, but wait a minute. This just triggering those checkbox. It doesn't do anything on our visual parts in the real pure CSS game. Now, how can I really use those inputs to show or hide other frames? How can I do it? What I'm doing here, it's really the most amazing magic that we have here in all those main navigation. What I'm doing here, I'm using two tricks. One, I can tell if there is an input of checkbox and you are with status of checked, this is the checked pseudo class if you don't know, go to any sibling element that you want, a specific one, and give it display block, display none, and in this way I can use those checkbox to hide or show other frames. And this is exactly what I'm doing here in the real game. For example, if I'm clicking the OMI button, it will trigger the checkbox in the beginning that have the ID of OMI pop-up. And this selector will start to work because it has the checked pseudo class, yes? And if it's with status of checked, go to the sibling element with the ID of OMI and put it with display block. The same way I'm clicking the how to play button. If I'm clicking the how to play button, this one, it will trigger the checkbox that have the ID of how to play pop-up, and it now will be in status of checked. And in this way, if it's status of checked, go to the sibling element with the ID of how to play and just put it with display block. And in this way, when I'm using this both button, they can open me those both pop-ups. But wait a minute, you need to ask yourself another question. How I'm closing those pop-up? Open, okay, it's nice, you're clicking, it triggers there's input. But now how I can close those pop-up? Let's look on the autoplay pop-up, this one, okay? These buttons of the X button and the close button are again not button HTML element. Instead, I'm using here again label HTML element. And this both label HTML element are in this specific pop-up of the autoplay pop-up are connected again for the input checkbox with the idea of how to play pop-up. And when this pop-up is open, it's meaning that this input is already in status of checked. But when I will click this or this input will it will change its status from checked to unchecked, and if it's changing its status from checked to unchecked, it will close the pop-up because this selector will stop to work for us. And in this way I can close both of these pop-up. I'm really using the same ideas but in the second way, yes? But you still need to ask yourself another question. What's happening when I'm clicking the save the world button? Let's see it, 1 second. This one, yes, the first one. Because when I'm clicking the save the world button, I'm doing not one operation, I'm doing two operations instead. What is meaning? Because when you're clicking the save the world button, it's first hiding the main navigation and then needs to show the game frame itself. Yes, two operations. How I'm doing it? Really the kind of the same idea. As you can see here, the checkbox with the ID of toggle game, if you are status of checked, first go to the game menu frame and put it with display none. Then go to the game frame and put it with display block. In this way I can create as many operations that I want, yes? I can put as many here that you want. And this written of course with the SAS preprocessor, it's a lot more readable to write it in SAS. You can create it in two separated selector in regular CSS, but I think this way it's a lot better and a lot more readable. But let's talk about one of the most amazing trick in this pure CSS game. When we are clicking on this coronavirus creature, they are being disappear and the score in the game is going up. How I'm doing it? Yes, I'm using here the CSS counters that we have quite a while in CSS, but let's first understand the logic of every one of the coronavirus creature in the game. As I told you in the beginning, if you are remembering, that every coronavirus is a label HTML element that inside have input with the type of radio. But I told you that all the visual part of the coronavirus are starting inside this label with on the div class of body, yes? This one are all the visual parts. The body, the eyes, the ears are inside this body, class body element of the coronavirus creature. But because all the visual parts are inside a label HTML element, and the input is inside this label HTML element, when you are clicking, no matter which place on the coronavirus creature, it's trigger this element. And because the input is inside this element, you don't need the for attribute and the ID, nothing. Just put the input type radio inside, and when you're clicking this virus, the label is triggering, and it's automatically triggering the input that you have inside of every one of those coronavirus creatures. And in this way, when I'm clicking on those coronavirus, it's trigger the label, trigger the input, and the input changes, input type of radio changes in status from unchecked to status of checked. And when this input with the type of radio is now checked, it's meaning that the virus is now dead. And I first need to hide all the visual part of the virus. How I'm doing it? I'm creating a selector in CSS. If input type radio is checked with a checked pseudo class that we saw before, go to the sibling element with the class of body of the coronavirus and put it with opacity of 0. In this way, when you are clicking those coronavirus, they are being disappear. But now we need to count all those dead viruses. How I need to count it? First, I need to create a CSS counter. Yes, CSS counter need to be declared before all those input with a type of radio in our HTML document. Because of that, I'm just declaring it on the body HTML element in this way. I'm creating selector for the body HTML element. I'm using the counter reset property. I gave it any name that you want. I gave it here the value corona. And now I need to count all those input type of radio that are being checked. And this is exactly what I'm doing. Input type radio, if you are checked, counter increment the corona value that we created here. And now we want to print the total score to the screen. I'm adding here the div class summarize, sum, as you can see here. I'm using the after pseudo element with the content property. The content property can get the CSS counter function that you can see here and can get the value corona that we increment here and created here. In this way, in every clicking of every one of the viruses, they're being disappear and the counter is going up and just print for us the total score to the screen. And because it's a very complicated example, let's see it in a live code in a more simple way. Here I created 5 coronavirus creature, label, input, and only the body of all those coronavirus. In the real game, the eyes and the hairs are inside the body here, yes? Inside. And the input type of radio in the real game is with opacity of 0 and you don't see it, but here I just want you to see it because that in this way you will understand it in a better way. And in the end, I just created a place that I can summarize the total score. Div class sum and score, and this is coming from the CSS counter. Yes, this number. And let's see it in the code. Body, counter reset, and creating the CSS counter. Input type of radio. If you are status of checked, the counter increment the corona value that we created here. Yes, here. And beside of it, if the input type radio is checked, go to the sibling element with the class of body and just put it with opacity of 0. This way it will hide us the big black circle, yes? This one, the div class body is the big black circle, like in the real game. And in the summarize section, sum after pseudo element, content property, the CSS counter function, just printing the corona value that we increment here and created here. And let's check it out. I will click one of the coronavirus and they are being disappear and you see the radio button being checked and the score is going up. Amazing trick to create the logic of all the score in pure CSS game. But now let's continue to our next trick. CSS Countdown. Really? In CSS? How can we do that? Let's check it out. As you can see here, you don't see any value of string in the HTML because all the string are coming with the content property in CSS animation. If you don't know, you can do it in CSS animation. Okay, but how they are coming? And as you can see here, there's only one number that's going between 9 to 0, and we see here 2 numbers. Let's print a string. Let's put the number 1 on where, and we'll see where we are seeing it. And you can see it's in the middle. And these both number are the before and after pseudo element. Let's delete the number 1 value and reset the animation. Okay. And I'm using here the same animation but in two different ways. One for the before pseudo element and one for the after pseudo element. The before pseudo element get the animation for 100 seconds and only one iteration. And it's meaning that every 10 seconds this number is going one number down. 10 seconds another one and another one after 10 seconds. And when the 100 second will finish, it will stack here and it will stay on the last frame of the animation because I added here the forward keyword value. For the second number, I'm using here the after pseudo element with the animation, with the same animation, but now for 10 seconds and 10 iteration. Yes, the same animation for 10 seconds and 10 iteration. This way, every 1 second the number is going down, every second another one, and after 10 seconds it will do this iteration 10 times. Yes, 10 iteration. And when all of this iteration will finish, it will stack on the last frame after all those 10 iterations, again because we have here the forward keyword value. And in this way you are creating the effect that these both numbers are working like a one number, but they are working very separatedly, and it's only look like they are coming together. And it's a cool trick to create in pure CSS game, but remember it's a two separated animation for two separate int values, yes? Or string values, more precise. Okay, and as you can see, let's wait that it will finish and we will see that it's stacked on the 0, 0 value. Nice one. Let's continue to our next trick. Random values. First, let's understand why I want to use random values in CSS. Let's refresh the game and let's play it out. As you can see here, we have this coronavirus. Every one of them get dynamic places in 6 points in the game. Every one of them. And as you can see, the size is getting randomized. Sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, and even the rotation of them is being randomized. But wait a minute. There is no such thing as randomized values in CSS. But we have it with SAS. And because it's a very important example, let's see it first in the real code of the game. Because how I done it? I created 100 different animation for every one of the viruses. And because you don't want to copy paste, I created it in a for loop. Like we saw in the beginning, we can create for loop with SAS, yes? And in this way, every one of the viruses getting a different keyframe animation. And in 6 points of the game, I want to create random values for some values of the transform property. For example, the translate y value, I want to give it a random value that going between 1 to 80 VH. I'm putting inside the random function that we have in SAS, give it the value of 80, and this way it's giving me a randomized value between 1 to 80, and I just double it with 1 VH. And in this way, in 6 points of the game, it's getting a random values between 1 to 80 VH for every one of the viruses. And I'm doing it the same for the scale and even for the rotation. And for you to believe me that there is such thing as random values, let's see it in another CodePen, but it's with a lot simple HTML and SAS. Compile HTML, let's see it. As you can see here, we have 6 li HTML elements, and they are with empty, no string inside. Yes, empty, 6 li HTML element. And with the for loop and before pseudo element, I'm creating the content property and just putting the string that random a value between 1 to 80 and just double it with 1 VH, and these values are being randomized. For you to believe me that these randoms are randomized, let's change the SAS file. I will press enter and look on the random values. Yes? Wait a second, randomize. Another one, randomize. Amazing cool trick to create all those random values. Nice, cool, neat. Let's continue to our next trick. The game over curtain. You didn't saw it in the real game, but after 100 seconds I want to put the game over curtain, and I want to put this CSS animation exactly after 100 seconds. How can we do it? It's really one of the easiest trick. Let's see the code. As you can see here, I have animation of that I'm doing animation with the curtain animation for 0.6 second. This 0.6 second value is the animation duration. It's how much time the animation is taking effect. Yes, 0.6 second. But I want to set this to this animation that it will start exactly after 100 seconds, or in this example, because we don't want to wait 100 seconds, let's tell the animation that it will delay for 5 seconds. And yes, animation delay I'm using here. As you can see, I'm using the animation delay and just give it a value of 5 seconds. In this way, the animation is waiting 5 seconds and only then it's starting to act. And this is exactly the way that I'm acting in the real game. I'm using the animation delay after 1 second, 100 seconds, and in this way the game over curtain appear after 100 seconds. For you to believe me that it's so easy, let's refresh the CodePen and let's count between 1 to 5. Let's refresh it. And 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Game over! Amazing cool trick to create the game over curtain. And before we finish, my friends, you learn in this talk all the tricks that with CSS you can create pure CSS game. And you may know now how to create a pure CSS game, but this isn't the most important thing to take from this talk. I think the most important thing to take from this talk is to create your own fun project. Something that you want to play with it. It can be pure CSS game, but it can be a lot of other things with JavaScript, SQL, everything that you like to use. And we, as a human, sometimes forgetting that the best way for our brain to learn new stuff is by playing. And if you're creating your own project that you want to create, in this way you're enjoying it, and it doesn't matter if it's hard for you because you're enjoying. And if you're enjoying, you will you find in the end solution to solve any problem, even if it's hard for you. And in this way it will be a less frustrating, and in the end you'll be a better web developer. And if you are being a better web developer, you're enjoying more your job, you're being better on your job, you're getting at the end better salary. And still, this isn't important. The most important is to have fun from my perspective. Because if you are having fun, you know we only will live once time in this life. And if you're having money, it isn't the most important thing. The most important thing, have your own fun, create your own project, and just enjoy and celebrate your life. And before we finish, my friends, if you want to know more about all this stuff that I've done here in this pure CSS game, I wrote 2 fully articles that you can find in these both links, and I will retweet them in the end of this talk in my Twitter account. And of course you can follow me here in my Twitter to see all my articles that I'm writing on the Medium account exactly here. And this is my website that I'm putting all the things that I've done until now in talks, CodePens, and everything else you can see there. And my friends, thank you very much for listening.